We're now on Daf Memamid Beis, and the Gemara dramatizes this question and this attack on Rav Huna by adding three words, Machatech be'ofarhu, that when he shechs bachutz and he completes the shchita with the second simon, he's basically shechting a piece of earth. This is not a carbon. It already became avodah zarah and a psul carbon after he finished the first simon. Omar of Papa. Let's go over what we know about the unique nature of chatas ha'of, and that is that chatas ha'of requires only one siman. And now we could have simultaneity, and he's chayav three chatos, the kulav hada yadadikasi. Now all three violations are clinched at the same exact time. Why? Because after he finishes the first siman, he has already fulfilled his obligation vis-a-vis chatas ha'of, and at that moment in time, he has shechted a complete shchita as far as the carbon is concerned, and he did it bachutz. So on the one hand, he's chayav a carbon for violating the Shabbos through shchita on Shabbos. And if you'll tell me, well, that's not a complete shchita, the answer is we're talking about chatas ha'of. On top of that, he violates avodah zarah, and we said that according to the logic of Rav Huna, even if he only shechts one simon, he didn't do a complete shchita, that's enough to incur zivchei mason and to passel the korban. But already at that moment, he completed a shchutei chutz. Omer Rav Papa, hacha b'chatas sofaskina, etc. Michti, I don't get it. Rav Huna keman omer l'shmaita. Rav Huna was building and standing on the shoulders of Ula. And what is Ula? So this is a Gemara back on Daf Mem Amud Aleph that Ula holds that even in a case where you're violating avodah zarah and implementing avodah zarah on someone else's object, as soon as you do an action on the object, it becomes avodah zarah. So therefore, the Gemara asks, "V'ula man ma'ase koldu kama." Ula doesn't require that you shecht a complete simon. Even at the beginning of the first simon, and in the case of chatasov, there is only one simon, but even at the very beginning of the simon, with a slight incision of the knife into one of the simonim, that's already avodah zarah, because Ula says ma'ase koldu. So if you don't need a complete action, then even in the case of chatas ha'of, which requires only one simon, then at the very beginning of the incision of that simon, it already is zivchei mason. And as far as the shchita is concerned, to generate a chiyuv of chutz, we have to wait till he finishes that first simon. In the case of chatas ha'of. So therefore, once again, we're back to square one, and we don't have a situation of simultaneity. And at the moment that he finishes the first simon, which would be the hakrova bachutz, which would generate a chiv chatas, it's already possible. I mean, it's already zivchei mason from the koldu, from the very beginning of the shchita. So this michti completely, shall we say, destroys the approach of Rav Papa. And the Gemara now rejects Rav Papa's explanation. We have to come up with another explanation. Ella, and the Gemara is going to reject this one as well. Ella be Omer b'Gmar's vichuhu ovda. The man makes a declaration that my service to avodah zarah is only going to be when I finish the shechita. He's defining his idolatrous custom or whatever it is. So therefore, we can get simultaneity, because then the avodah zarah will only be chal at the Gemara Shchita, and at the Gemara Shchita, he'll be chayav for Shabbos and also for Shchutei Chutz, and therefore he incurs three chatos. Yeah, but the only problem is, I don't get it. If he makes that declaration of Gemara Shchita hu ovda, so that, I mean that could apply to any carbon. And we don't need to introduce chatos. Yehachi says the Gemara, my iryachatos. Well, why are you formulating this whole? Why the brisa in the case where you chayv for three chatos? Why in the scenario of a chatos? Forget about a chatos. Lishmein and zevach. Use the word zevach. Zevach means any carbon. Let's say, for example, a carbon shlomim. Forget about chatos. If the man declares that his avodah zarah, his idolatrous cult, is only complete with the Gemara Shchita, so the Gemara Shchita of a carbon shlomim will be after he shechs two simanim, and you might ask, well, if it's shlomim, it's his carbon, and he should be able to prohibit his carbon at the very beginning of the shchita with a ma'aser kol dehu. But the answer is he made a statement and a declaration: I'm not serving this idol until I finish the entire shchita. So at the moment he finishes the shchita, he incurs three different chatos. Number one, Shabbos. Number two, avodah zarah. And number three, shchutei chutz. So where are we up to now? At this point, we rejected even the second answer that there was a stipulation on the part of the idol worshiper that he's not completing his idolatry until he completes the shechita. So therefore, we have to go back to Rav Papa, but try to brush up Rav Papa. Okay, this is something that we've discussed in the past, that even though with regard to the Veshet, which is the esophagus, we said that any slight perforation or hole in the esophagus makes the animal into a treifa, but not in the case of the kana. I'm sorry, I said an animal, but we're talking right now, let's say, about a bird. Are we talking about a bird? Just one second. No, I don't know. I have to review it. We had it in the past, but I think it's any animal. But in any event, so with regard to the kana, which is the windpipe. So again, I don't know much about the animal biology, zoology, but the Gemara assumes that even if half of the kana was cut, the animal could still survive. So it's not a treifa. And not only that, you can shech the animal by placing the knife inside this cut, inside this perforation, and just bring it over to the majority. And at that point, there's simultaneity. Why? Hosif of culture who gemara. Right? It's complete shchita if he adds just a culture. Again, he has to put the knife right in there where the nekev is, he calls it a pekam. And now it's the kulavari adodi. Everything happens at the same time, meaning his shchita generates a shem zivchei mesim as an act of idolatry when he gets that kolshu, and at that moment he incurs a chiyuv for shchutei chutz, and it's also a violation of Shabbos. Omer of Papa, he loved the Omer of Huna Simon Echad, lavi chatas tuvta. My Maisa Rabbah. If not for the fact that Rav Huna mentioned Simon Echad, then our original question, why the Brisa formulates its case as one of chatos, would not be a valid question. Because we could have said that in a case where you are shechting something that's not yours, for example, a chatas that belongs to Gavoa, because you, as the Bailam, cannot eat the basar of the korban, it belongs to Hegdesh. And in such a case, Ula would say a Maisa Koldu is not sufficient, but rather you need a Maisa Rabbah, which I believe that the phrase Maisa Rabbah is synonymous with a Maisa Gomur. So that we understand the Chiddush of the Brisa in the case of Chatos, that despite the fact, no, not despite the fact, but because of the fact that it's not yours, it's a Chatos, and it belongs to Gavoa, as opposed to Shlomo, which is yours. Therefore, we require a Maisa Gomur. And if it's a Maisa Gomur, now we have simultaneity when he completes the Maisa Gomur. If only Rav Huna had not mentioned Simon Echad, we would interpret it Ula to refer to a Maisa Gomer, Maisa Rabbah, and now we have simultaneity. When he finishes the entire Shechita of two Simonim, then since a Chatas is not his, then Ula holds that in order to generate an Isra Avodah Zarah, you need a Maisa Rabbah, because ain't Adam Osa Dovashen Shalom unless he does a Maisa Rabbah. And at that point, when he finishes the Maisa Rabbah, we have simultaneity of all these three Yisurim. The Omer of Papa, Ilav the Omer of Huna Behemas Chavero, Lavi Chatas Tuvta. My time of the day Motzi Osar, the Chavri Lo Motzi Osar. If Rav Huna had not explicitly said that we're talking about Behemas Chavero, then we wouldn't have asked that question as to why the Brisa presented the case of a Chatos. Because Rav Huna was talking about generating an Iser of Zivchei Mesim through a Maisa Koldahu, but that would only apply if it's his own animal. But if it's not his own animal, then a Maisa Koldahu would not be enough, because they know the Osa Dovashen Shalom would have to be a Maisa Gomer, a Maisa Rabbah. And that Maisa Rabbah would apply here. So again, why did the Brisa mention Chatos? And the answer is because it's Eno Shalom, and therefore you need a Maisa Rabbah, and the Shechita doesn't generate an Iser Zivchei Mesim until after he completes the Shechita. But if it was Shlamim, where he has his own Bailus, then it would be Asur immediately with a Maisa Koldahu, and therefore he'd be Chayav for Shchutei Chutz. Pshita. So Gemara says this is, Rav Papa is just making a kind of a mathematical calculation that we could figure out on our own. Mal the Tema would have said, Kevin the Kani le Kapar Kedi De Dami Kamash Malon. Rav Papa wants to tell us that you don't own the Karma Chatos. Why? Because you don't have any chelik, you don't have any portion in the meat. Only the Kohen could eat part of the meat. But you would have argued that maybe it's considered like it's yours. Why? Because you have the kapara. The kapara itself gives you bailus. And I think when we were learning Zvachim, we came to that conclusion that the fact that you have the kapara rights that's inherent in this karvan, in a case of a chatos, then therefore it's yours. Now, if it's yours, then you could be chayiv for a Maisa Koldahu. And if you be chayiv for a Maisa Koldahu, then there would be no simultaneity, and the Brisa, which generates three chatos, would not be on the mark. So Rav Papa tells us that no, when you're talking about Oser Dover Sheina Shalo, and therefore you require a Maisa Gomer, a Maisa Rabba, Shlamim, let's start with Chatos. Chatos is not considered yours, even though you're the owner of the kapara, but still you don't really own the carbon itself. It's Mama Gavoa, it belongs to Hashem. You magdish it as a Chatos, and it doesn't belong to you. You get the kapara rights, but that's like a that's like a side benefit that results. Rav Nachman, Rav Amar, Rav Yitzchak Amri, Ein Adam Oser Dov Shein Shalo, and that's it. Period. Even if you do a Maisa Rabba, it doesn't matter. You can't generate an Isa on something that's not yours. Meisvei. So now we're gonna have a problem from Chatos. Right? Ashokei Chatos. What's going to chayiv shalosh Chatos? The Queen of Chatos of Chatzi Kona Pogum. It's time to Chatzi Off. Who? The Kulabadi Adorika Asyon. But Avol Zevach Lo. V'i Einon Dover Shloshlo Afilu Chatos Behema Ma'ir Chatos Off Afilu Chatos Behema Nami. How can you tell me that Eino Dev Oser Dover Shein Shalo applies straight across the board, even if he does a Maisa Gamur, when we're talking about Chatos, and we said the simultaneity through the fact that it's a Chatos Ha'ov, you only have to do one Simon, and half of the Kana was already Pogum, and he put the knife in that place. And the whole reason here why he's chayav for all three simultaneity is because we're dealing with a Chatos Ha'ov. So the Gemara asks the following kasha: what are you telling me? That if it would have been a chata, right? If it would have been a regular zevach like a shlomim, then he would not be chayav for simultaneity. But I don't get it. The osed davar shein shalo is my iriya chata sofa fil chatas bein nami. Right? We could have this simultaneity even in the case of chatas behema. And why is that? Because the animal would not be considered his. It's a korban chatas. Chatas is not yours. So why introduce a chatas ha'of where the shechita is only one simon? Say the same exact thing in the case of chatas behema. And now we're going to say that you need a maisa gomur because it's not yours. And they don't know osu dam shein shalo. Just 1 second. Let me just make sure I have the cheshbon. Right, because also shalo, so therefore the carbon remains a carbon kosher, and therefore he's chayiv for shchutei chutz on a carbon kosher. And why is he chayiv a chatos for avodah zara if ain't on them also dov shein shalo? Because ain't on them also dov shein shalo has to do with the heft of the animal and its status as a carbon puzzle and something that's osur ba'no if it's ivchei mesim, but has nothing to do with the gavra and his chiyuv for violating avodah zarah. So he has to bring a chatas for violating avodah zarah. And we'll finish it up now with the last few words in this sugya. Keva de kanya leila kapara kidi de damya. So forget about, whether it's chatas or for chatas behema. We're going to consider it as if it's his. And why? Because he has the kapara that is generated by the carbon chatos. And therefore, the owner, when he shechts this as an idolatrous sacrifice, as soon as he starts cutting with the initial Maisa Koldu, he has already incurred a Chiv Avodah Zarah because he's considered the Bailam, because the kapar is his. So the Mishnah therefore was compelled to introduce the case of a chatas ha'of or the chatzikana, etc., to find a case where shchute chutz would already apply with the initial act of Maisa Kol Tahu, because we're talking about chatas ha'of. Okay, then, so this is where we'll finish it up for today. Tomorrow is Tuesday, and we're not sure probably if all the dentists are working according to schedule. That means that Steve would not be here tomorrow. But anyway,
Yeah,
we'll go back to the regular Tuesday schedule. And
right,
the Tuesday schedule is 9:30.
correct.
Okay, so thank you very much. And if you hear from Steve, let me know.
Okay. Have a good day.
Yeah, call to have a great